So welcome to this chapter number 2, Basic Photo Corrections from Adobe Photoshop Classroom in a Book 2023. Let's take a look at the files that this book talks about to start. So we're going to end up making a final product that looks something like this, while our starting product looks something like this. He's showing us how to do some simple cropping and some touch-out processes in the book. So let's go ahead and take a look at opening up the first picture and taking a look at what we can do in Adobe Photoshop. Now there are some strategies for retouching. The book talks about some of these. The idea of what are my steps that I need to go ahead and duplicate the original image. Not a bad idea, so I'm not actually affecting the master copy, or at least saving it as a different file name so you're not going to override the original file. That's crucial and important if you're working in Photoshop. We'll look at some different ways of should I crop and orientate, straighten my piece, adjusting the contrast, the tonal image, removing maybe a color cast. It's a little yellow, it's a little blue, it's a little red. What are those things I need to touch up? Do I need to remove something? Do I need to heal a blemish or a touch out? And those are things that are the basis of, yes, I can do it. You might even know the tools, which this video will help, but maybe what are the steps I should take before I even touch the mouse or the keyboard? So depending on what your purpose is, you might be resizing to make it smaller, you might be doing just to remember a memory. Here it's a vacation photo of years gone past from the author's past as well. And so let's take a look at what we can come up here with connecting the resolution and the image size. Now let's go ahead and talk resolution. Now resolution is an interesting topic. It's well debated online and forums and all over on YouTube as well. But in terms of pixels, a pixel count is each particular count in an image. If I go ahead and zoom in quite a bit, eventually Photoshop will start to show you the pixel by pixel breakdown of each particular piece in there. You can actually start to see pixel by pixel. That is one particular pixel. What that looks like in terms of our size, well, I zoomed out, Control 0, and it shows me I'm at 85.3% of the image. I'm not seeing 100% of the pixels right now at a smaller size, but I can also see in Photoshop, go to Image, Image Size, what my settings are and what that looks like, and what the resolution is showing. So here I am at 2160 by 2160. That means it's a square image. And in terms of resolution, 1000 by 1000. So if I was to change this image to make 1000 by 1000, that would now be 1 megapixel. 1000 by 1000, height and width gives us 1 million pixels. Now if I go to 2000, you type 2000, and 2000 by 2000 would be a total of 4 million pixels. So by default, the 2160 is actually a little more than 4 million pixels in this actual image. Now, there are different ways we can think about resolution. There's resolution details or image resolution. I can go ahead and change this number, but if I turn off the resampling, it's just changing the way it will actually present itself. It's not actually changing or resampling the file itself. It's not changing more or less in my size. Now, in the digital world, some things can be interpolated. Things can be actually blown up in size, and there's debates on really they're adding much quality or not. But we could actually go ahead and resample a size to make it a larger file size. So let's go to pixels, and I can go ahead and increase the pixel count. And now the file is getting larger. You'll see the image size would be larger. The image has gotten bigger. Doesn't necessarily there's more detail or it's enhanced in any way, but I can resize it bigger. We're really not adding size, or I should say, not size, but quality to our image. It's just blowing up each pixel bigger, adding to the number of pixels, but not really giving us detail, which is a foreign part of resolution, is how much detail is in the scene. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the resample off, go back to the original, turn my resample on. I could go ahead and I can end up cropping it. We'll talk about cropping away to make it smaller. Now, if I was to take a 7 by 7 inch crop, we can go ahead and do that with the crop tool. So go over here to my toolbar, click my crop option. I can come up into my width and height and resolution option. So I cannot just do a cropping section, which I could, my square resolution or my different settings there. I can go into a width plus height plus resolution, and I can actually give in a particular count. So let's say I want to make it printable. A good print resolution is 300 dots per square inch. So if I was to make it, say, 5 inches, the book talks about doing 7 inches, I could print this at 7. Let's go with 5 inches, IN, by 5 IN, and I can give it a particular pixel count. And let's go 300 pixels per inch. Pixels per square inch would be a good print resolution. And I go ahead and hit my print size like that. And then when I go ahead and choose my crop, it will actually resize it to that particular resolution. And it's cropped to that particular resolution. Now it would be a 5 by 5. Do the math, it'd be 1500 by 1500. It has shrunk it down a little bit from the original image, and you can see that it's done in that regard. So I go by 7 inches by 7 inches by 300. That'll become 2100 inches, or 2100 pixels in the height and 2100 pixels in the smaller dimension. Now if I go ahead and change this to a smaller resolution, the book talks are going to 72 ppi. Now if you do the math, 72 ppi, pixels per inch, times 7, you're going to get set 504 pixels by 504 pixels. It'll be a much smaller file size. We won't be able to print it as much, but it will also be smaller for web use. Sometimes for the web or for email or other screen purposes, you might want a smaller resolution just to keep it smaller and more optimized for that particular medium. So factors to consider, different differences between what a resolution looks like. If you're close to something, you need probably a higher resolution. If you want a higher quality screen, you might want to have a higher resolution to be able to view it larger with more detail on your particular screen. Now, a laptop screen that says it has 220 ppi might appear to have the same resolution as 360 ppi on a smartphone. So it is somewhat relative based on the device and how close you'll actually be to the screen. If you're looking at your screen at a close distance, like on your phones close to your eyes, or maybe your laptop's a few feet away, resolution does have those factors to depend on the overall quality. Chapter 2 also talks about Bridge. So we want to talk about opening a file with Adobe Bridge. Now if you're new to Photoshop, you go to File, and you go to Browse in Bridge, and that will allow you to open up your file, which will then open up the bridge. You can also just search in your Windows or in your software for Bridge and find Bridge. My filing option here now has Bridge with the layout. I do prefer to use it for ways to handle my files, to see my files, and know what my particular files are. So I have my file open, I can see what the particular file type is, the file name. I can see a lot of this information of what the resolution is, 1400 pixels by 1400 pixels, or the different file size, the different PPI. If I go ahead and move this up, I can also see a lot of the different properties of when it was saved, other different portions of the metadata, which is important and helpful with particularly using Adobe Bridge. Now, if I go up to my option here, I can also save many different options like your favorites panel, your lessons folder, lots of things in here. I can save presets, so I can go to different locations, different folders on my computer and navigate this quickly, which is helpful. So let's just start opening up our 02 Start Tiff file. I'm going to go ahead and double click that open, and it will open up into Photoshop. So I have my file open. This is the original image that I have here. I want to go ahead and start to work on it. I'm going to go ahead and recommend saving it as a file, save as the book talks through, saving it as a different particular Photoshop file. And I want to make it instead of a TIFF file, which is actually a very universal file, but for Photoshop purposes, we're going to keep the layers intact using a Photoshop file. Go to this drop-down menu, and we'll go down to a Photoshop PSD, not a Photoshop PDF, which is different, a portable document file. We want to go to your PSD, which will be an extension to the file, a .psd instead of a .tiff. I'm going to choose Photoshop file, and I'm going to go according to the book, calls it a working file. And then we'll go ahead and hit save. And now I've started the process of creating my piece. So the first step the book talks about is straightening and cropping the image in Photoshop. And we'll go back to the Tools panel, which we talked about a little bit in terms of resolution because it is closely tied together. I'm going to my Crop tool. And then I'm going to my Options panel here, the different options for that particular tool. Like most things in Photoshop, there's different options in there. And in the options, I have my width, height, resolution. If you don't have that already, you might have changed it to a width, height, resolution. And we're going to go ahead and type in 7 inches by 7 inches, 7IN for the width, 7IN for the height. And we're going to go ahead and type in 200 pixels for the square inches, the resolution factor, 200 ppi, pixels per square inch. And then go ahead and start with the straightening command. So this looks like a little level, like you're leveling off some type of piece you're working on construction. You want to make sure it's very level. Click the level tool. This gives you this little level tool now that I can go ahead and I can choose what I want to be my straight edge, my straight line, because the crooked is in the actual scan is crooked of the photograph. Click from one image, click and drag all the way to the other side, right there. And what it does is it notices that alignment and uses that line that I draw to be now straight based on that measure. Now let's fix it. Now process it will crop something out, which actually has less of the viewing area that was there. Now I have to crop in a little bit tighter on the left, on the top and the bottom. My image cropped about right there. We can readjust it, and it might not exactly be perfect according to the way you're looking. We don't want any white edge on this section. I hit OK, and now I have that white is gone. It is now level. The next step is adjusting the color and the tone of your image. So once it's cropped and straightened, let's go and adjust using the curves and the levels adjustment layer to remove some of the cast. There is a little bit of the color cast because the aged photograph and all scanned in. It doesn't look quite right. Now, levels and curves are a good one. They can be a little more complex, but don't be intimidated. They are something you can definitely do. So let's go into our options or adjustments panel, which is in the bottom corner. It looks like the yin-yang sign. I click and pull it up, and there are many different options. You can give you the non-destructive way to do it using an adjustment layer. The same tools are available under Image and Adjustments. You have the same tool options in here, but these now are permanently damage that layer. We want to have an adjustment layer. The beauty of Photoshop is the ability to control edits even after they're made, days or weeks or months or years later. I click the yin-yang, and now in my adjustment layer I have my curves or my levels. The book starts off using the curves tool. We're going to go ahead and use the adjustment layer with the curves. It pops my menu up here in my properties panel. And what I want to do here is now select my different types of eyedroppers. There's one for the shadow, the midtone, and the highlights. I want to click the highlights adjustment. And what this will do, when I click on somewhere on the picture, it's going to take wherever I click and it's going to adjust that to make that portion white. It's going to take out the color cast and make that a pure white on my particular area. Now if I choose something that's dark, something like this boy's shirt, and I click it, it's in a way overexposed because it's trying to make that bright part or that dark part much brighter in the picture. It's not really what I wanted to do, so I'm going to go ahead and undo that. But what I want to do is now select something that's white, a white shirt, a white dress, and we have a couple different options to choose from here on the particular book. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in nice and tight to this girl's shoulder, and I'm going to go ahead and take a sample of the white stripe on her dress by clicking something like that, and it now has adjusted the colors. It's taken away some of the cast. It has also made some of the color tones gone, but it also has made the image a little bit brighter. Now, as you look at the curves tool, we do see it's adjusted some of the blue and the reds and greens at different levels because we see three separate lines. If you look closely at the screen here, it has adjusted things, so it has gotten brighter. We can see that in the screen. So my white point is hit on a white section to select and to override that color issue. Typically get the best use if you click on a neutral white image. Now if you're clicking something that maybe is an off-white or a teal or a beige, it might not turn out quite as well. Now we'll use an levels adjustment layer to refine the tonal range of the image. I'm going to go up to my adjustments and choose levels. It pops up a different menu. The levels tool looks a little bit different than the curves. And now it wants me to adjust some of the different settings here. Now I'm going to go ahead and go to 15 on the shadow, the dark section. As you can see, as I go too much, it does get much, much darker. The highlights I can go much, much brighter with. And I'll adjust my overall exposure. Now, I need to tone down the contrast, make it a little darker. I'm going to go up to 15 on the darks. And on this midtone slider, it's not going to expose the brights or the darks, but I can change the contrast a little bit without washing things out or getting things too dark. So that's an important slider here. I'm going to go ahead and, according to the book, type in 0.9, so it's going to get a little bit darker, a little more contrasty in the dark sections, and it's going to make it just a little more higher contrast image. The darks are darker, and it does have not that washout image, which is pretty typical of older scanned files. And that looks much better. Turning that on gives a little darker contrast. Now the book talks about you can go ahead and flatten these layers. I typically would probably just leave all these intact, but the book has you flatten all the layers so you can actually merge them together. This makes it easier, so now you're dealing with one layer instead of multiple layers. Select all the layers. I hold Shift and then click the background layer with the levels being the first one selected. I can right click on here and go to flatten the image. Now all those adjustments are permanently done on this particular file. I have the file saved as a different name, so it's okay. But now all those adjustments that I've made are now into the file. That cannot be undone once I save the file and come back later once it's closed. I do have the history panel. We talk about this in chapter 1. You can watch that video for other options on history panel and many other helpful tips. But I do have different layers and curves that I can go back on and see, as long as I have it open for this particular save. As soon as the file is closed, I do lose the history panel options once I open it back up another time. Next, we're going to look at the spot healing brush tool, and that gives us a lot of options as how we try to tweak things and how to change and to remove problems in my area. So to find my healing brushes, there's many different options. I look for the little band-aid with the little circle on the side. The spot healing brush, I'm going to click and hold and pull out like there's many other tools. The spot healing brush is here, and it's probably the easiest of the tools to use when it gets into the touch-up work. I've selected my brush. It's got some brush settings here. On the top of my options panel, I can also make some adjustments. In the process of adjusting this, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit so I can see things a little bit clearer. I recommend doing all your adjustments at 100 or even 200%. 200% allows you to see something. If it looks good to you at 200%, it's going to look good at everybody else when they see the picture at 100% size. So I go into my options bar once I've got the tool selected, and I'm going to go ahead and open up the different brush settings here. And I'm going to go ahead and specify a brush size of 25 pixels. And I'm going to 0% hardness. In other lessons, we'll get into more about what that matters and what that means. So a nice hard brush here, but it's still fairly small. It shows me the brush here, and I'm going to go ahead and touch out some of the little scratches in the particular sky. So I'm just going to paint out that area, and it removes all that file, which is really, really nice. Now, the thing you want to keep in mind is when you're doing your touch-up spots, you don't want to go too far into the layer. If you touch some other area, it might get confused on what it's trying to remove automatically, and it might make some smudges by dragging something that you didn't want cloned or touched out in the process. So make sure you're keeping your brush in similar patterns, something like that, and it does a pretty good job of making the healing selection. So you zoom out, Control S or Command S to save your work, and you move on to the next step. Applying a content-aware patch. So in the Tools panel, we're going to go ahead to the Object Selection. We're going to click and drag out to the Object Selection tool, not the Quick Selection tool. That used to be my favorite, but the Object Selection tool has really gotten good here in the last version 2 of Photoshop. And so we're going to go ahead and select our boy. The area that we want to select. I just drag an area, a marquee around him, give him a little bit more range, and let it go, and let it do its work. Now, it will take some processing power depending on your computer speed. It may or may not happen very quickly, but now it's done a pretty good job of selecting the boy, and you can see the selection is now nailed in on the boy that we don't want in the photograph. So make sure I have all the boys selected and it's not cut into the boy. I'm going to go to Select, Modify, and then over to Expand, and I'm going to go ahead and expand it 2 pixels to expand the area that is selected, and hit OK. It's made it slightly larger around the edge of it. Now in the Tools panel, we're going to go ahead and find the Patch tool. That's under with the different healing brushes, down to the Patch tool, third option in the Healing Brush Clone Stamp selection area of the Options Tools panel. So I've got the Patch tool selected, and I'm going to go ahead and now do a little bit of touch-up of the boy. So I'm going to hover over the boy. The selection now pops up with a little arrow and the little patch quote sign there. I'm going to go ahead and click and drag over to the side, and it's actually moved to an area next to the woman. And I'm going to go ahead and let go when I get him out of the space that I want, about like that, and I go ahead and let go. And the selection actually looks pretty good. It's done a really good job of doing that touch-up. Now, I will say this became a lot harder a few versions ago in Photoshop, but it's getting really smooth, really clean. And now is the computer doing a lot of the work for you? Sure, but you're telling it what you want to do. You're giving it parameters and selecting the boy, expanding the selection, and then moving it over. So you do have some control. It's not that computers are taking over the world and Photoshop will be completely made by robots and artificial intelligence. We do have some input in the process, which is a good thing. Then once we got the selection done, and did a pretty good job, we want to get rid of these marquee tools. I'm going to go ahead and go to Select, and then deselect, or Control D or Command D if you like shortcuts. And now it's done a pretty good job of removing them. Impressive, not quite perfect. Now we'll make it even better. So let's repair some of the areas with the stamp tool. It's not a perfect touch-up. You can see the brick mortars don't quite line up. It does look a little bit off in some areas. So instead of using some of the options like the patch or the healing brush, different options to clone there, we're going to go down to the clone stamp tool and do some of the manual adjustments. Now, the options in terms of the spot healing and healing brush and some of these tools are very automatic, and that's a good thing. The clone stamp tool does touch-up work where you have control of, I want this area to be moved to this area. You have a little more control and less of the automation process, which is good in some ways. So I'm going to my toolbar. I'm going to go ahead and change it to 60 pixels. and 30% hardness. And we do want to make sure that the option for aligned is selected. It probably is by default, but just make sure that option of aligned is selected. We're going to move the clone stamp tool to an area where the top of the bridge and the wall is smooth. I'm going to go and zoom in a little bit here. Go and hover over on my particular brush here. I'm going to hold Alt with the keyboard, or Option if you're on a Mac. Like this means the crosshairs like in a gun. I can narrow in on this particular selection, and I can choose this is the area that I want to bullseye or target. I click. Now I let go of Alt, and as I move my mouse over, we'll take from the point here on the left, my plus sign where I've targeted, and it will move it to the area on the right. So we're going to clone or move what I selected automatically to the right. Now the nice thing about Photoshop, it actually shows you what it would happen in real time. You can see the preview of what it was actually being adjusted from one section to the other section. Now the key that you don't want to do is you don't want to have the mortars really off, because if you do so, it doesn't look right at all. The brick looks like it's been through an earthquake and shifted, or the mortars look like it was painted by or put together by someone who had no clue what they're doing in construction, which might have been me. I not having a clue what I was doing in the construction. But you want to get those aligned before I actually click. Once I get them aligned the way I like, I can click and drag, and I can start to fix out those mortar sections to make it look more accurate in my clone stamp tool, and to make different portions look more believable. Getting those corners aligned pretty good there. And that's starting to look pretty good in my overall selection. The floor isn't perfect. We can see there's a little bit of upheavalness there. I'm going to go ahead and Alt, select my point, align that pretty good, and then start to touch up the floor. Something like that. Now, the clone stamp tool has some negative connotations. Some people think that it gives it this nasty fake look, and if you're not careful, if you click too many times from the same Alt click point, you can start to make it look very clone stamped. For example, I click here and I click and drag. Now I shoot the same portion over and over. It starts to look very much like it has been cloned, which is the name of the tool, and it definitely looks kind of fake. It doesn't look very real, believable. So some people think, well, don't use the clone stamp tool. But the option to choose where you want that source to go and where you want to move it to is helpful. That some of the more automatic tools like the healing brush or the spot healing brush or the patch tool or the content aware fill tool can't do. You have pluses and minuses. That's why it's there. So we've done our adjustments. We've made it look pretty good. And we can see here there are a few spots that we need to fix up with our lines, where the buildings actually line up, to make it look like it's going to be believable. Let me make my brush maybe a little bit smaller. Start to touch out that line so it looks pretty close. I'm going to click and let go again. Now I'm going to go ahead and click in here and line those edges. And that looks pretty good, but it takes multiple attempts to control and uncontrol. So it makes many attempts to control and to get that different selection looking pretty good. And right now it actually looks really good. So that makes a major difference in my overall quality and makes a big difference. Control S or Command S to save your work, or to file and save if you like to go that way as well. And we move on to the next step of the book. Next, let's go ahead and touch out this line here, and you can touch out anything else that needs to be fixed in your opinion. Go ahead and zoom in to about 200%. I'm going to go ahead and see this fold, the crease in the actual image before a scan is starting to look like some deterioration here. I'm going to go ahead and remove this. Now I'm going to use some different, more automatic controls, but with the clone stamp tool, I'm going to go ahead and click an area to the left, hover over here, and start to touch out part of that crease. Now that's a way if you want to go ahead and brush it out piece by piece. Another way that's very helpful in the way of touch-up work is to click over here. I'm going to click once. Now I'm going to go ahead and let go with my mouse. I'm not clicking anything on my mouse. I'm holding Shift, and I click again, and it draws a straight line from point A to point B, which is very, very helpful when you do clone touch-up work or even drawing a straight line. Click, let go, hold Shift, and click again. It will draw a line from point A to point B. So it draws that line very smooth and quickly to have a very accurate selection of that sky. And we'll go ahead and just touch out a little bit there. Make sure my bridges are aligned. That makes sometimes multiple clicks. And the bridge, because the curve makes it a little more difficult for sure. And use a mortar here.
Mortar joint to fill in there.
So now that my piece is edited, I'm going to hit Control S to save, or Command S on a Mac, or I go to File and save my particular work. Next, let's look at sharpening your image. This needs to be maybe a little bit sharper. Maybe the scanning, maybe it's just a little soft in the haziness of your camera. I'll go ahead and zoom into 400%. Control plus all the way to 400%. We can start to see there are some artifacts. There are some different things that are starting to fall apart in the particular piece. I'm using the space bar to navigate in my piece, the hand tool to temporarily give me that option. I can definitely see there are definitely artifacts in the sky and even part of the shirt and the photo that need to be removed. So next I'm going to go into Filter. I'm going to go down to Noise and then to Dust and Scratches. In the setting, I'm going to go ahead and put 1 in the radius and 0 in the threshold, and we'll go ahead and hit OK. Turn the preview on and off, you can kind of see what happens before I actually do anything. And by removing the dust and scratches, this 1 in my dust and scratches does start to take away many of the little nicks and scratches through the artifacts of scanning or just aging of the photograph. Now that removes the artifacts, but it does soften some of the edges. I'm losing some of the crispness and the sharpness around the edges. Now I want to be able to bring some of that back. So next we're going to go to Filter, then down to Sharpen, and over to Smart Sharpen. I'll get my preview option up in here, which is helpful. In the Smart Sharpen, you want to make sure you have your preview option on. If you don't, you won't be able to see actually what's happening in your settings. You'll do all these changes and nothing will be happening because your preview isn't on. So make sure your preview is on. I'm going to go ahead and go down to my lens blur, make sure that is on as well. So try to remove some of the lens blur in the process. I'm going to go ahead and drag the amount slider to 60%, or just type it in. I'll go to my radius slider of a 1.5. Now the radius slider determines the number of pixels surrounding the edge pixels that affects the opening. The higher the resolution, the higher the radius setting should usually be. And when you're satisfied with the results, we're going to make sure we can go ahead and click OK. Now it looks a little bit sharper than we had before. That's before, and that's after. A little bit crisper and sharper. So there you have it. We've gone ahead and looked at different ways to use the clone stamp tool, the healing brush tool, the spot healing brush tool, the patch tool, crop, straighten, adjustments, levels, adjustments, curves. Many different options. These are some simple basic things by taking a photograph and making it look a little bit better and making your life. These are just some simple things to make your work look even better. Thanks for joining me on Better Picks in just a few clicks. If you have any questions, put them in the comments below, and I look forward to answering them and seeing your discussion as we go forward. Don't forget to hit subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching Better Picks in just a few clicks. Make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to see more videos on how to take your photography to the next level.